Present.
Board Member Bauer,
Present.
Board Member Eagleston Cheslowich,
Present.
Board Member Heinrich,
Present.
Board Member McKinnon. I don't see him online. Board Member Wimmer. Here, we have a quorum.
Thank you.
Is that my own notice?
And
Not all here.
now can I? What do you have, Amy?
May I read?
Yes, please.
Good morning, Happy New Year. We are with the Historic Resources Board. During the meeting, members of the public may provide live public comment by submitting a speaker card prior to the start of public comment on that item. Speakers may address items that are not on the agenda during the oral communications portion of the meeting. If a public comment speaker wishes to speak on more than one agenda item, please indicate so on the speaker card. Spoken comments via a computer will be accepted through the Zoom teleconference meeting. To address the board, go to zoom.us/join. Meeting ID is 968-0019-7512. When you wish to speak on an agenda item, click on Raise Hand. When called, please limit your remarks to the time limit allotted. Spoken public comments using a smartphone will also be accepted through the Zoom mobile app. To offer comments using a regular phone, call 1-669-900-6833 and enter meeting ID 968-0019-7512. When you wish to speak on an agenda item, hit *9 on your phone so we know that you wish to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. A little rusty. So now, can I have a motion to adopt a resolution authorizing teleconferencing?
So moved.
Second.
And can we just do a voice vote on this? I always forget. So all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Thank you. Do we have any members of the public that wish to comment?
No, I have not received any speaker cards or raised hands on Zoom.
Thank you. And Ms. French, do you want to just briefly run through the schedule of meetings?
Sure. So welcome back, 2023. This is our meeting for the month of January. And then it's less likely that we'll have a meeting on the 26th, but certainly it's an option. We've crossed out for this year, we've crossed out Thanksgiving and the Christmas holidays to make it very obvious early on that we will not be meeting. And we'll see how it goes with the amount of workload that comes in as far as how often we're going to meet each month. As always, if you can look at your calendars for the year, or at least the first half of the year, and see where vacations might be planned and let us know, then we'll get a better idea about quorums and perhaps which meeting is best each month to target for some items. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will be absent on the 26th.
Okay, thank you. And that concludes.
Moving on to 3200 Park. We don't have anybody from the applicant to speak with us.
We do. They're all online right now.
Oh, okay.
We have a historic consultant on behalf of the city from Rincon Consultants. We have a historic consultant from the applicant team, Sobrato, and a couple of representatives from Sobrato, as well as the architect for the cannery portion of the building are all online right now. I'd love to give a short presentation to begin and then recommend that you hear a short presentation from the applicant after that as well.
Chair Willis, can you get the volume up at all? Because I can't really hear you very well. I mean, it's like the volume is out there. I'm hearing it from the back coming forward.
Just on mine or?
No, both.
Just speaking.
Is it better if I speak into
Oh,
the
yeah,
mic just a
that's-
little?
okay,
Okay, I
yeah.
think maybe I just wasn't speaking into the mic well enough.
Thank you.
Apologies. So good morning, board members. Chair Willis, I'm Claire Raybold, Senior Planner. I'll just start this presentation by saying I know there is quite a lot to digest with this project. So today we're not looking for a formal recommendation from the board. The goal is to provide information to board members on the proposed project and then just a little bit of background on how we got here as well as to get some feedback on a few key items related to the historic aspects of the site. And I do also want to acknowledge that there are numerous addresses associated with the site. The city has used the address listed on the application filing, 3200 Park Boulevard. But I want to make it very clear that the project encompasses 340 Portage, which is often the address used for the cannery building. So this visual is just intended to orient you with the project site. There's a lot of references in the staff report to different parcels. We have the townhome parcel, the cannery parcel, which contains the remainder of the cannery building and the new parking garage. The Ash parcel, which would be the existing Ash Street office building. The city dedication parcel, which incorporates an area that would be part of public park and a future affordable housing project, as well as a connection out to Lambert. And then parcel 5 is the Audi building parcel, which would remain as is as well. So just a little bit of background. The project site is located within the boundaries of the North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan. And the work on the NVCAP began in 2018 and is still ongoing. So there is not yet an adopted plan for that project. As part of that process, we have received a significant amount of feedback, though, on how the public and the property owner may want to see that site redeveloped. Throughout 2021, there were numerous overlapping discussions going on around the site. Sobrato filed the 200 Portage Townhome Project in March 2021, which is a streamlined housing project under Senate Bill 330 that included 91 townhome units, but did not include a public park or future affordable housing project adjacent to Matadero Creek, as is proposed in the proposed project. The project did not retain most of the cannery building. It was similar to the proposed development agreement in that respect, and did not provide, did not provide any public open space. In October of 2021, Council directed the formation of an ad hoc committee to explore a negotiated solution for the future of this property. So the ad hoc committee met for about 6 months and concluded in summer of 2021. And then council held a study session to present the work of the ad hoc committee and begin the public process for the development agreement in August of 2022. Council directed staff to execute a tolling agreement, which allows for the townhome project to be placed on hold while the city completes the public process for the proposed development agreement that's before you today. So I just wanted to give a quick overview of kind of the key negotiated terms of the development agreement. Sobrato would be allowed to construct a new one-level overgrade garage for research and development and retail parking needs, which would replace the existing surface parking to be removed in order to accommodate the land dedication to the city for the public park and future affordable housing project. Sobrato would renovate the cannery building to support the existing R&D use and accommodate 2,600 square feet of retail space with public view opportunities to the interior monitor roof trusses and exhibit to recognize the history of the cannery building. They would dedicate a 3.25 acre of land to city for open space and affordable housing site. And it does include demolition of about approximately 40% of the cannery building to accommodate 74 townhome units. Subrata would also contribute $5 million to the city for open space and affordable housing, and pay all applicable development impact fees, as well as develop a TDM program for the R&D and office space. And this development agreement would allow them to retain the existing R&D and office uses on the site, which are currently non-complying uses. So the historic background of the site. Page and Turnbull prepared a historic resource evaluation as part of the NVCAP process to determine the eligibility of the site under the California Register of Historic Resources. And it was identified, the cannery building as well as the associated ash building were identified as eligible for the California Register of Historic Resources under Criterion 1 events. I do want to note that the analysis did not explore the eligibility for the National Register, but typically if a site is eligible for the California Register, it has similar criteria for the National Register. The site is not listed on the city's local register. And a reminder, I know some of you were on the board at the time, but the HRB held a study session in July 2019 to receive information about the eligibility of this site and provide feedback on the historic resources evaluation. There was no formal action taken at that, but generally comments from board members at the time indicated concurrence with the findings of the historic resource evaluation. So following the submittal of the application for the 91 unit townhome project, the city began a environmental impact report to analyze the impacts of the proposed project, including the partial demolition of the cannery building. The development agreement that's before you today is analyzed as an alternative in that environmental impact report, an alternative to the 91 unit townhome project. And the city released the draft EIR for the proposed project in September 16th of 2022, and the comment period ended on November 15th, 2022. The EIR identified a significant and unavoidable impact on a historic resource for all build alternatives that were analyzed in that EIR. It did include mitigation measures. So under CEQA, you are required to mitigate to the extent feasible, even if it ends in a significant and unavoidable impact. So as some of the mitigation measures for the cultural, the impacts to that building, there were 2 mitigation measures identified. Mitigation measures, cultural resources 1, which in quick summary is documentation following the general guidelines of the Historic American Building Survey. Level 3 documentation would be required. And mitigation measure cultural resources 2, which was installation of a high quality on-site interpretive display in a publicly accessible location, preferably near or within a portion of the retained warehouse building at 200 Portage. So there's a few key considerations that we are asking for feedback on today. So one key consideration for the HRB is the remaining cannery design. And what we're trying to figure out is, should the project try to follow the Secretary of Interior's standards for all or some aspects of the remaining building, despite the fact that it would no longer be eligible for the California Register? So we want to understand from you if you feel that there is value in doing that. And should certain character defining features of the building be prioritized if you do want to retain certain aspects of that? Second question for the Historic Resources Board is asking you to provide some feedback on the interest in using public art on site to convey history of the site, either with all or part of the public art contribution requirement. The public art contribution requirement is estimated to be approximately $840,000. We're also looking for any suggestions as to any art you might be interested in, or locations for public art on the site, or any thoughts on what that public art, what you would want to see it conveying about the history of the site. And then finally, we're interested in understanding from the Historic Resources Board whether there is any interest in placing the remaining cannery building and or the Ash Street building on our local register under criterion 3 or 4, which is for contributing building. Whether there's any merit in doing that, given the changes that are proposed to the project. So with that, just a quick summary on the recommendations as was outlined in your packet, and I'll just kind of leave. I'll come back to those after you hear from the applicant.
Thank you.
Does the applicant have a presentation?
Sure. Well, hi, this is, good morning. This is Tim Steele. I'm the Senior Vice President of Real Estate Development at the Sobrato organization. Thank you, Chair and Board, for the opportunity to speak this morning. Also, thank you, Claire, for your comprehensive staff report and presentation. I know this is a pretty complicated situation. I'd also like to introduce Robert Tersini, who is my colleague here at Sobrato, and Matt Davis, who is our historical architect with our historical architect firm, Architectural Resource Group, or ARG. I'm going to allow Matt some time to explain how we brought him to our team and what his involvement in giving us guidance on historical significance here. And I'll leave it at that and let Matt Davis at ARG give his introduction.
Thank you, Tim. Good morning, commissioners. My name is Matthew Davis. I'm an architectural historian and principal at Architectural Resources Group. We're a 60-person firm devoted to working with historic buildings and sites. And I just wanted to very briefly describe our involvement with this project. So back in mid-2022, the Sobrato organization contacted ARG and asked us to develop a series of preservation design guidelines. Design guidelines that were specifically focused on the portion of the cannery building that they were planning to retain. So that, the cannery parcel, as Raybold mentioned earlier. Sobrato engaged us because they were aware that, because the building is essentially a lightweight industrial warehouse, bringing it up to code would likely be more complicated than if they were working with a sturdier building. And they also understood that the building had been modified over time, as is typical for a facility such as this. So they wanted us to help them get an understanding of what the parameters were with respect to historic character. So accordingly, some of my ARG colleagues visited the site to observe current conditions, and together we reviewed the Page and Trimble report in detail to understand the property's historic significance and extant character defining features. So based on that review, we then developed a series of guidelines that were broken into categories such as height and bulk, roof forms, cladding, fenestration, et cetera. And that's the ARG document you see in the packet for today's meeting. So that's really it for my summary. Thank you, commissioners, and I will be available this morning for any questions you may have. But with that, I'll hand it back to the folks at Sobrato. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Both Robert, Matt, and myself will be available going forward to answer any questions or such. So With that, I'll hand it back to the chair.
Sorry. So it's now a good time for the board to ask our questions. Okay. So David, do you want to start us off? I think we can ask questions of either staff or the consultant.
So thank you, Chair Willis. I had a question for Claire in the staff report. Just want to be clear that I understand the historic additions to the cannery building. We see in our packet, and it's 213 pages long, of written documentation, and then there's another one in plans, that a picture of the cannery building, I think it's the original cannery building, and it might be on page, one of the pictures is on page 91 of our packet. I think that's the first cannery building, and then subsequent additions in the space that will be demolished occurred, I think, the latest 1940s something. Okay, so the building as it exists now, with those, I think, 2 additions to the original building, would be, the additions are 73 plus years old. So those, by the Secretary of Interior standards, would be considered historic resources and essentially part of the protection category. So if that's accurate, we have seen as a board, and members of the board have been to seminars where subsequent additions to original buildings have been removed and the original buildings renovated, and those still be eligible for historic register listing. So I'm wondering, I'm confused by why in your presentation, you said that you thought the building, once the additions to the building were removed, the original building, were it to be renovated under the Secretary of Interior standards, would not still be eligible to be a listed building.
Yeah, I can have Julianne Murphy from Rincon Consultants can speak to that. She prepared the analysis to determine whether the modifications as proposed in the plans would be, what the impact would be under CEQA. So I'll have her speak to that.
Thank you, Claire. Like you said, my name is Julianne Murphy. I'm an architectural historian with Rincon Consultants. We prepared the EIR for the project and a subsequent standards analysis for the development agreement. And thank you for the question, Commissioner Willis. So in the HRE, the Page and Turnbull does not provide a breakdown of contributing and non-contributing elements. What they've done is say that the whole site is eligible for the California Register. So though they provide some development history on when the original portions of the building were constructed and some additions, I think it was difficult to pin down when exactly those additions occurred, and that they were all in place by 1948, and that the period of significance for the site spans from 1916, when it was originally constructed, to 1948. And so it includes all of the building and the Ash building as well. So all of that is considered a historical resource.
So let me just again reiterate my question. Why is the original building, even which we have pictures of, not eligible, since we have a visual record of that being the first portion without the additions?
Sure. So because the period of significance continues into 1948, it is a historical resource. That portion of the building is still a historical resource. So its removal wouldn't be aligned with the standards. If the period of significance had been identified with a narrower window and that had been post that period, then you would have standing to remove those later additions, but because it's been identified as being a part of the modifications that were made during the period of historic significance, it is a historical resource, though it is a later addition.
But you just said that the Page and Turnbull report, which I read,
Yeah.
and you accurately reproduced, has that period of significance, but that's an arbitrary designation, is it not?
No, so this property is significant under criterion 1, which is events and its association with its function as a packing facility. And that lasted from 1918 or 1916 to 1948. So it's not arbitrary. It's based on the use as a cannery facility during that period.
So
I'd like to, whoops, excuse me. So my question is, so if this project goes through and the original part of the building, which I'm going to refer to the two monitor section of the building, if that stands in 10 years and it's separated from the part that's going to be demolished and the adjacent part of the additions, could then a new study determine that it was eligible for the National Register? Would it be likely that a new study would determine that the original building, if that was all that was standing, would be eligible for the National Register?
I think it would be a very difficult case to make because in addition to significance, you have to have integrity. And integrity would consider how much of the building has been altered. And so if it included up to 40% of this demolition as proposed, and then the building modifications that are being required for this project, I think the case to then have it still be eligible for listing would be extremely difficult.
Thank you. David.
Thanks for that information. Claire, in your presentation, you said that the development would have unavoidable impact on the cannery building. I'm puzzled by that phrase because I don't think anything in this development requires that the positioning of the new buildings and all of this work demolish the cannery, any part of the cannery. There is a 14-acre site. Now, I am aware of and followed all the neighborhood and city planning options. I understand that there were lots of different proposals, but unavoidable seems to me to suggest that this is the only option available. And I don't think that's accurate.
So unavoidable speaks to the project as is proposed or specific
Okay,
alternatives.
fine.
So they're saying that if this specific project or this specific alternative moves forward, that
Okay.
would result in an unavoidable impact.
Great,
on
thank
a
you. Yeah,
resource.
fine.
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to be clear that the record of this hearing articulates that this is not the only option. This option unavoidably destroys 40% of the cannery building. It's not the only one available. That's all. I got the sense as the presentation was made that demolishing 40% of the cannery building was unavoidable. Not related just to this project. So I'm trying to make a distinction here between this project and other options. That's all.
I would just note that the city did not identify any potential feasible alternatives that would meet the project objectives and that would reduce it to a less than significant level. There was an alternative 2 in the EIR that explored the reuse of the cannery building as is for housing, but it is presumed that would still result in a significant and unavoidable impact because it's not clear that it could be done while still meeting the Secretary of Interior standards. There would be pretty significant changes that would need to be made to meet fire safety, building code, green building code, all the windows, exits that you would have to provide, ADA compliance. And so we felt that it needed to be identified still as a potentially significant and unavoidable impact for the purposes of the EIR.
I think that the current proposed project and the way it's designed is probably appropriate for later discussion. But I would just remark that at the Presidio in San Francisco, all of the original buildings in the around the parade field have been rehabilitated according, almost all of them, I think, according to the Secretary of Interior standards. And there have been multiple new uses, adaptive uses to those buildings. So I don't think it's impossible to do. I think the problem here is that the primary driver of this project is housing, and it was easy to find a lot of housing space right in this area. So let's move on. That was my question about unavoidability. Thanks for that.
Thank you, David.
Post-project, what advantage would there be then with trying to list what remains of the cannery on the local registry?
It's a good question. I guess there would be a couple things. It would be whether it helps to kind of identify and kind of bolster the historic nature of the site and still display it as a historic resource in our city. It would make sure that any future modifications to this building would need to be done in line with the Secretary of Interior standards, or otherwise go through a full CEQA process before they could be modified. So there would be small benefits. It was something that we were exploring because council had expressed an interest in exploring the idea. And so we wanted to present the option to the HRB and get feedback on whether they felt there was merit or value in doing that.
Would the applicant, if we followed that path, or maybe the applicant could answer this question, be willing to engage in a conversation about what defining features might be preserved that might modify the proposal as it now stands, so that later on, when the property is listed on the local register, those things are in fact protected? Well,
I think we've started with that kind of an approach by having Matt Davis at the table to help guide us through developing our scenario. I'll let Matt add any additional color to the answer. Matt?
Well, I think that one of the questions I had is how far into the future this designation would be pushed, because it wouldn't necessarily have to be all that far. I mean, I would be nervous about something that was posited too far down the road, because too much can happen between now and then. So this isn't a before where the city has designated something locally that wasn't otherwise deemed California or National Register eligible.
Amy French, Chief Planning Official. I can say that the inventory that is in place in Palo Alto that includes many modified buildings in the category in 3 and 4 status, and the original inventory was not exhaustive as to whether these all of the inventory sites were eligible for California Register. So this is a more recent effort that we're doing. Each time we come across a potential resource and we prepare one of these historic resource evaluations, we analyze it for eligibility for California Register. But we don't have a status on the existing inventory as to eligibility for California Register.
I mean, I guess the only thing I would add is that, personally, I'm excited by the idea of finding some way to recognize this property locally, because I think that will accord well with the public's ongoing appreciation of the building. I think that the public wouldn't be as fixated on the portion to the north that's being removed. And that they see those monitor roofs and they would want to know about the longer history of the property. And I think there's still going to be plenty sufficient material and structure on site to convey that history. So, I mean, I think it's an opportunity for the city of Palo Alto to speak to an aspect of its heritage that is, almost entirely erased at this point.
Okay, the Ash property is not going to be post-project modified. It would still be eligible for the California Register, correct? So why wouldn't we just go ahead and recommend that that be done for that particular structure, as opposed to combining it with whatever remains of the canyon?
Can I ask, Christian, if you could be a little closer to your mic, just because it's fading out a little bit. Thank you. A little closer.
Is
Thank
this
you.
close enough?
Yes.
All right, I'm not going to get any closer to it here. So since the Ash building is not going to be post-project modified, it will still be eligible for the California Registry. Why wouldn't we recommend, or just go ahead and recommend that that be done, as opposed to trying to combine it with the other and then later on, or at some point, add it to the local registry?
So if I can put a finer point on that, please, through the chair. When you say that be done, you're speaking of putting it onto the city's inventory rather than, because we don't put things on the California Register, right? That's what you're talking about.
Would the applicant maybe be willing to do that, to request that be done for that building, since it will be eligible? It's not going to be modified post-project enough to make it ineligible. Is that the right way to phrase the question?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's, again, only an owner can put their own property on.
Well, we just presume that, I think, going
Right.
forward. So I'm sorry if I was
For the California, we have the power.
Maybe they would be willing to comment on that.
Yeah, so we have the power to put it on
Okay.
the local inventory if they're so amenable to that.
But he's also saying they could choose to put it on the California Register, perhaps.
Just
If
the
they,
Ash.
does Sobrato want to speak to that? I don't know if there's been thought on that.
No, we haven't really explored that in depth internally. We'd be open to exploring that.
To the chair, may I respond quickly?
Yes, please.
Thank you. I just want to point out that the existing HRE identifies the whole property as eligible for the California Register. So if you were going to pursue trying to list just the Ash building, that historic resource evaluation would have to be updated to speak specifically to the eligibility of that building on its own. So it would have to be revised if that would want to be the route, because the existing historic resource evaluation identifies the whole property as eligible for the California Register.
I don't know enough about the technical side of things, but I would suggest that that building in the Page and Turnbull report was suggested had been moved on the site. That's not the original location of the building. And I know in talking with Matt earlier, there was some question as whether it would or wouldn't qualify based on that being a relocated structure.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. It has been relocated. As Julianne mentioned, I think that we would have to analyze whether, with the modifications to the cannery building, whether on its own, this could be California Register eligible. I think that it could still be considered for our local register, but we would have to have further evaluation to determine if on its own it could be eligible still for the California Register, because it's really associated with the cannery building, and with the modifications to the cannery building, I don't know that it still would be California Register eligible.
This is sort of a related question for the property owner, but has there been any consideration to either examining statewide landmark or point of historical interest designations for the property?
We could certainly explore that. We have not explored those options.
The Sobrato has not as of now.
Claire, well, actually, this is probably for the historic planner that we're talking to. The Palo Alto has a very famous Hostess House property that was moved from its original location into Palo Alto. It's on the National Register of Historic Buildings. My understanding, and I'm not a professional historic resources person, is that moving a building within the site vicinity, and I mean moving a building from one place on site to another, doesn't necessarily prevent listing on a historic register if it still maintains its relationship with the original purpose. And I would think, in this case, the Ash Building, which is the one I think we're talking about, was part of the cannery. I guess it was the management offices. So, and without knowing when it was moved, it wasn't moved less than 45 years ago. So its position would, again, I think, qualify it as a historic resource, no? Is that not, am I not understanding that correctly?
Yeah, I'm happy to respond. Moved resources are still eligible for listing if they retain their historic setting. So the fact that it's been moved would not preclude it from being listed.
Great, thanks.
So is revisiting this to see if this particular property on its own might be eligible for the California registry, is that a major piece of work or is that a minor revision? It seems to me that this is a pretty important piece of data to have in some definitive way.
It would require preparation of a historic resource evaluation. I don't know that that would necessarily be a significant amount of work, given that we have an HRE that, you know, could be worked with to use to help prepare a more detailed HRE that's specific to that building. I think that we would, because it can only be placed on the California Register if the property owner is willing to do that. I think that we would need to have further discussion with Sobrato about whether they would even be willing to do that. So I think that would be a question first. But if that's something that the HRB is interested in having the city explore further, we can certainly have further discussion on that.
I think that might be something that hopefully these buildings will be documented before they're demolished or significantly altered. And it seems like that analysis might be something that could happen in concert with that. And I certainly hope that we get a chance to really study the original cannery building as a standalone, because it definitely seems of a scale that could be maintained. And personally, I see that as art. So, or at least the potential to be art. So I think that it is worth seeing if we can get some additional analysis on historic merit as individual pieces of this project, because it certainly is quite the conglomerate.
So if I could ask just a follow-up question, then, is the board interested in continuing to have the city explore the cannery building at all? I'd like to get feedback on whether there is an interest. I hear your comments on the Ash Street building, or is the statement that you are not interested in having us explore the local inventory for the remainder of the cannery building?
I think we all like to express our opinions on that. I'm just wondering if you want to finish with questions before we move into, and do we have any further questions? And maybe that's where we are right now. So does anybody want to respond to Claire? David?
Help me understand where we are in this process. Usually we have a presentation from the applicant of the project. Is that not going to occur?
They just gave a quick summary at the beginning. They're not planning on giving a separate other presentations.
So the evaluation of the building, the 74 unit housing building as it would, evaluation of compatibility, massing, scale to the cannery, the original cannery building, called the 1918 cannery building. There's going to be no discussion of that, no presentation about those features. There's a very significant section in our package by,
David, I think we're going to address that in our comments. And
Okay, well,
because
I mean,
obviously
they're
that
not
is,
planning on giving a presentation. The information is part of the packet, and we're looking for your feedback on that.
that's,
Is there something specific you'd like
Well,
their architect or them to speak to?
I guess it's the Rincon group's evaluation of the revised plans that wherein they basically say that the changes to the cannery building remove all the original fabric and make it incompatible with the Secretary of Interior standards. I think that's the purpose of our board's focus, one of them at least. And typically, the architectural firm will present their thoughts on how they arrived at the designs. And absent that, I don't see how we can make a complete and fully informed decision about this project. I may be the only one on this board that feels that way, but I find that the changes to the cannery building are the equivalent really of demolition because they're taking everything away but the two distinctive roof features. So
Yeah.
I'm puzzled by this.
Yeah, so I mean,
Okay, yeah, so I'm sorry, I don't mean to continue to go around the circle. If they're not going to present, if they're not going to present their architecture, then maybe the board will consider postponing this until they can come back and do that.
well, we're not looking for a recommendation today. We're looking for feedback based on the information that was provided. And so the feedback you're providing is the type of feedback. I think we can certainly have the applicant speak to the architectural intent if you'd like to have that. I'm sure they can give a brief presentation on that. I think generally what you're stating with respect to demolition is what we are saying to you is that this project results in a significant and unavoidable impact and is essentially demolition of a resource. However, and so no matter what you do, it will not meet the Secretary of Interior standards as designed because we're stating that demolition of at least 40% of the building is an impact on a resource. However, there is a remaining portion of the cannery building, and that portion has some redesign to it. And from our analysis, it's fairly significant redesign in terms of the placement of new doors, placement of windows, some of the updates that will need to be made to the corrugated metal may result in more replacement. It would be replacement in kind, but it would still be a replacement of potentially a lot of the facade components. And so It's also, some changes to the roof design. It's to accommodate solar. It would be some changes to remove, or really it's raising up the rest of the ground level to align with the loading platforms along the rear. And so the question for the Architectural Review Board is, is there merit in trying to follow the Secretary of Interior standards for aspects of this remaining building, even if it doesn't retain integrity anyway? Or I guess, is it better to try and align it with more of our standards for urban design in terms of pedestrian and more open space and more light being brought into like a retail space? So I guess that's the question kind of before you today, is there merit in retaining any of it? And if there is there merit in retaining, certain features of it, maybe that are more critical to conveying the historic use of the site, I suppose. So with that, I mean, I can certainly turn it to Sobrato and maybe they can have their architect speak to some of the design intent features if you'd like.
Maybe, Carolyn, maybe what we should do as a board is discuss, just what we want to accomplish today, what we're being asked to do, and then make recommendations to the council about how council should proceed. Is that what we're being asked to do?
We are not asking for any formal recommendations today, but we are looking for some kind of initial feedback, and we plan to return to the Historic Resources Board for a formal recommendation.
So it'll come back.
Yeah, and I would also add to that exactly. And if you are interested in further exploration of a nomination to the city's local inventory, there is work associated with that. So we want some clarity, if that's possible today, as to the leanings, I suppose, of each member about a local inventory, because there is some work associated with that we would want to get going on, whether that includes the Ash building only or Ash plus, the remaining 60% or whatever it is of the cannery building.
Before we go further, do we have members of the public who want to speak to us? I think, and then we could get into our comments.
Yes, there are 2 raised hands on Zoom.
Does anybody have further questions before we ask for public comment?
Just a quick one. Former council member Holman has, in our packet, we have included questions she raised about the draft environmental impact report. I don't see a date on that, so I can't tell whether her questions were answered in the revised plan.
She is here on Zoom.
Yeah.
If you want to start with her.
Oh, well, yeah, okay, so her questions were on page 183, but I don't see in any of this a date, so I just.
And I'll just note that I don't know that her questions have been responded to in the most recent plan. The city is still evaluating this as the second round submittal was only just submitted to the city. So the plans before you today were actually the initial plan, so they will not reflect any potential modifications to address public comments or comments from other boards and commissions that we've been to. And then her comments were part of the environmental impact report. They were formal comments on the EIR. And so the city is currently preparing formal responses to comments. And so we will have formal written responses, modify the EIR where appropriate to address those comments and request modifications to the plans as appropriate accordingly.
Yeah, I'm bringing it up because in her, one of her bullet points is comments on cultural resources, which have to do with demolition of the cannery building and changes proposed to that series of buildings. So that's why I'm asking about her letter.
So let's move on to comments from the public.
Sure. First one, Karen Holman, if you can unmute yourself, you have 3 minutes to speak.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the council had no input from the HRB to use in negotiations with regard to the development agreement. Today, surely the HRB can comment on alternatives to the development agreement proposal with regards to the cannery building. To board member Bauer comments different configurations of development that could result in retention of the resource. The DEIR determines the DA impact plan will eliminate the California Register eligibility of the cannery. On several occasions, the NVCAP members asked for a feasibility study be performed to determine what could be done with and within the cannery building. As far as I know, it was never performed to inform outcomes. However, and for instance, the DEIR assumes the housing within the cannery building would, 1, require a second floor, and 2, would not satisfy the Secretary's standards, both without any rationale for why those conclusions are drawn. In other words, there is not rational alternatives considered that would retain at least enough of the cannery building to preserve its California Register status, or what that threshold of retention might be. Neither are investment tax credits or the State Historic Building Code referenced that could help with feasibility of retention. Compatible with design with the townhouses, does the ARB have such expertise as they are reviewing the townhouses independent of and without your input? Yet, according to the staff report, the townhouse has gone to the ARB at least once. What historic compatibility expertise sits on the ARB? None that I know of. Wrapping in front of the cannery building is an impact. The subsequent affordable housing project directly in front of the remaining cannery building is not considered an impact. It's not even evaluated. The DEIR mentions several impacts to the cannery building and determines there is a significant unavoidable impact. I respectfully add that it is not just a local impact, but a regional impact, given this is one of the last remaining examples of the Valley of Heart's Delight in the valley. The DEIR does not address this, but surely the HRB will do that. I do hope the name of Portage Road will be changed to honor Thomas Foon Chu. The staff report asks that you consider adding the cannery remainder on the local inventory, but as presented, it does not even satisfy the Secretary's standards, even though in the August report to the council, it was indicated that satisfaction of the Secretary's standards is required. If it isn't required, then it is essentially a complete demolition. The staff report asks that you consider adding the remainder as a category 3 or 4. That, of course, would mean that you wouldn't have any review in the future. Among the positive actions you can take, you could list the ash property on both the California and local inventories. I hope you will do it as a category 1 in the local inventory. The city can apply to the California Register. You don't need owner consent for that. The owner would need to object for that not to happen. So the city actually can do that. I know you know, but creating exhibits and such is not a mitigation. There is no mitigation for demolition. And why do public art and memorializing Chu and the cannery incredible contributions have to be considered separately, as is indicated in the staff report? Why could not the art memorialize the cannery period and Chu's accomplishments? And lately, there's been a report of existing damage near the monitor roof elements, but that report was done by the applicant with no peer review I'm aware of, at least. There is reference of rebuilding part of the roof due to required solar on the roof. Why is it required and on the roof? There are many ways to be green. One of the highest means is reuse and restore, not demolish. Lastly, in my opinion, not only would the ARB be fulfilling its role, but the council should be informed of your expert opinions, utilizing your experience with the Secretary of the Interior standards. None exists among council members that I'm aware of who negotiated this agreement. No matter what eventuates, they would be better informed by your input, your expert input. So I hope you will exercise that muscle. If not you, who? Much would be accomplished consistent with a development agreement if but designed and configured differently. Thank you for allowing the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
And next speaker is Winter. If you can unmute yourself, you can talk.
Hi, my name is Winter Dellenbach. I wish to associate myself with the comments of former Mayor Karen Holman. And I'm speaking on a little bit higher level, not so detailed as former Mayor Karen Holman usually is able to speak. You each and as a board are being asked by this applicant to do something that is not only destructive to the cannery, an unarguably valuable historical building, but to do something I see as self-destructive to our community. And by that, I mean, you are being asked to ignore that to demolish nearly half of this building is to destroy its entire historical value. Putting up some plaques and photos will only mock its preventable loss. The loss, again, that's preventable. That Thomas Foon Chu owned this cannery must be given great thought by you and whoever else may be taking a look at this proposed project. More than 1/3 of our population is of Chinese Asian ancestry now in Palo Alto and will probably grow. The cultural significance of the cannery will only grow also with time. And I'm very well aware, and this is no one's fault, I'm not pointing fingers. I'm certainly not of Chinese Asian ancestry, but I'm not seeing anybody in the room of the people I see today that speaks of much diversity. And I think we really have to be sensitive about this. The other thing I want to see is, can you imagine if we allowed 40% of our historical buildings and resources to be demolished? Because this certainly can open the eyes of others to follow this applicant in what they are proposing. And what is the trade-off? 2,600 square feet of retail, that is tiny, and R&D offices. I mean, this is just so distressing and heartbreaking. And this is preventable, and it's preventable today by you folks. You're going to take another look at it, but this shouldn't be. And please don't allow this to happen. That this cannery building should stay intact. Thank you.
Thank you. So do we want to move on to board comments? And I could start. You want a 5-minute recess? What do we think? Amy, do you have a problem if we take a 5-minute break? No. Okay, let's do that. Do we want to wait till 9:50?
I think so now. It's 4 minutes to swallow and say Happy New Year. I'll just say, because we do have one absence for the 26th, I'll just say right now, let's consider not meeting on the 26th and we can focus on the 12th of February. That is the first meeting of February. Second meeting. So the first meeting of February makes sense. Hoping that we'll have some good things to report out at that second meeting for a process. Oh, yeah. That's the other thing is I sent an email, I don't know if y'all received it, about the recruitment. So I will look. I think it was, the applications are due on March 23rd. So, which means you're still in place for at least the first meeting of March, but probably the second meeting too, because they won't have gone through the exercise with council. So I think you're good through March. Oh, from the clerk, from Ben. Really? Yeah. Well, it's like if you're employed, so we have to get the new person, we have to kick you out. Yeah. We have to write those formal letters too. I always call that letter when somebody resigns or leaves. Employee wise, we have to send this really rude letter. Don't come back. Awkward at best. Oh, for people serving at the pleasure of council, I think you can come back. Well, we'll put it this way. Oh, you're a young lady too, so I'll just say anytime there's a vacancy brought on by somebody leaving before their term's over, you're going to be a person I'm going to reach out to. Be prepared. I'm telling you, I can't read here.
Time's up. So I'd like to call the meeting back to order at 9:50 and ask the board for comments. Margaret, would you start us off with your mouth full? Sorry.
Yes, excuse me. Thank you. Well, I do recall that we did briefly review this project. I don't know, a year or two ago when they were just talking about the possibilities of what is going to happen to the site. And I do recall being presented with some photos and some architectural features that were worthy of maintaining and preserving. So I was just sharing that I recall that presentation of this project before. And I have to say, I do agree with the need to preserve the historic value of the site. And I think in even today's meeting, we've kind of identified what that value is. Obviously, the ash buildings, I think, it's definitely necessary to to protect those, but also the two significant, the original cannery building. And like David pointed out in one of the earliest photographs, it was a standalone building. And then we see in the presentation today how the applicant has obviously emulated that design and has tried to retain an essence of it in its new design, which I think is a great effort, but I think maybe we need to take it a step further to really make that into a preservation effort, not an emulation effort. So I also like the idea of the parcel that's going to be preserved by, I think it's parcel 2. And I know we didn't really talk too much about parcel 2 and what was going to go on with that, but it sounded to me like that was going to be an open space, maybe a park space. So I think in the location of where this cannery, the original cannery buildings are, there could be a nice connection to the open space to these cannery buildings. So I think I would like to see more of a preservation effort and have the cannery buildings more celebrated and preserved, and have it as, you know, an open space community use building. I think that the high density apartments and condos that are now introduced to the site, they, you know, because it's so high density, I think the open space of the park and open space of the cannery buildings would be a relief to them to have more open space. And I think that's I think one great way to preserve the site.
I just want to interject as we give our comments, and might be good to particularly focus on staff's recommendations on interpretive signage and art. Just if you have anything to add.
Well, I think absolutely art should be a part of this project. Signage is obviously important as well, but I don't see any presentation of either of those items to us. So until something is presented to us, I'm in support of it, and I hope to see it, but I don't, until we have something to critique and comment on, I don't have any specific comments.
Thank you. David, do we just go in order here?
Sure. So I share Margaret's concern about demolition of the building. I'd like to start by saying I think that the hired reviews of the building, that is Rincon Associates and Page and Turnbull, were very helpful and very detailed, and I appreciate those making process. So my comments are not about in any way about their work, although I do have a problem with the concept that the original historic inventory review grouped all three of these buildings together as though they were one, and thus losing one. My sense in reading the materials, and I may not be reading this correctly, is you lose one, you lose them all. I don't think that's consistent with anything I've ever heard in any of the numerous seminars I've been to over 15 years as a board member. So I'm distressed, knowing the history of this development. I'm distressed that the best we can do is take 40% of a building that is as Council Member Holman points out, the last cannery in this part of Santa Clara County. I don't even know if there's another. I know in Sunnyvale they have cannery buildings that have been converted, I think, or repurposed, but they mostly stand, I think, as they were. So it distresses me that this is the best Palo Alto can do with a building that represents a part of our community's history that is really unique, and that's an Asian American businessman coming to this area and successfully developing a business, a canning business and a cannery, at a time when historically Asian Americans were not highly thought of. And as Councilmember Holman pointed out, we have a substantial Asian American community living in Palo Alto now, many of them my neighbors, and I would be astounded if they weren't offended by this. So I think there are alternatives to this project that would meet the requirements of getting a large number of housing units in here, and I don't think it requires substantial destruction of the cannery building. If that is, I'm assuming because this project has been going on forever that that's probably not likely. So I'd like to turn my attention to, and one further comment on that. As I've been told many times in seminars, there is no mitigation for demolition, none. You can put plaques up, you can put dioramas up, you can do picture displays. It's not a mitigation feature. I understand why you want to do that, but that's not mitigation. It wasn't addressed in the draft environmental impact report. So I think if the project moves forward, that the HRB should seriously consider reviewing the original 1918 cannery building, because it's proposed to be basically revealed. In every other project, and many that I have heard about in seminars, building in a project like this would often require, or at least consider, doing a renovation of that building, and not what is proposed here today. The proposal is to take all the high windows up in the two high points of the roof, make them massive instead of small. We can see from the historic photo what the building looked like. I don't have a problem adding some windows at the end of the building. On page, I think it's 118 is a photo. Yeah, on page 118 of our packet, there's a photo. You can see there were buildings, windows on the end of the buildings, of this original building. We could do any number of things to renovate this building and make it more useful. And as a retired general contractor, I know that there is enormous flexibility in terms of engineering that will allow this building to remain without being substantially demolished. Further, replacing shingles, roof shingles, replacing siding, replacing windows with like materials is not in conflict with the Secretary of Interior standards. There is no material that will last forever. We always replace roofs, most of the time with like materials. We replace wood shingles with wood shingles. That doesn't disqualify the building as being compliant with these standards. So I don't want to take any more time really, but I do think that when this project comes back to the board, we need to have a presentation from the architects that explain their thinking and why the designs that they are putting forward are not compliant with the SOS standards of compatibility in scale and mass, et cetera. Because I think the cannery building could be saved and restored. It doesn't have to be demolished as they're doing here. So hope that happens. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Christian?
You know, at the end of the day, I think our goal should be to maximize the preservation of the story of Thomas Chu's life as much as possible within the reality of what project is actually agreed to and goes forward. So a lot of what we've been asking about today is to get more information. So at the next session, we could be a little bit more specific about recommendations in that regard. I'm particularly interested in the idea of getting the Historic American Building Survey done of this entire site, or at least the entire cannery building, if it's subject to a partial demolition, because it's more than pictures and it's more than plaques. If that's done correctly, it should create a database of content and data that would allow this structure to be studied for years to come. I don't see why there isn't a lesson in our public schools about this building and this man. There should be, because there's lots of other stories that get taught about local history here. And this one is a big missing item that was, I think, has surprised a lot of people. They've heard about it over the last year or so. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. Yes, please.
Okay, I am new to this board, and this is the first time I've actually seen these plans and studied them. My question is has anyone ever looked at swapping the city designated park area with the cannery? Why couldn't the cannery have an adaptive reuse as the open space, playgrounds, and everything for the community, and the park space, could be built up with the housing? So you would retain the cannery intact. You could put, all the different basketball, badminton, ping pong, all the indoor sports there. It's big enough for, other types of team sports. Has that ever been looked at?
So to be clear, the project includes not just housing, but the significant amount of research and development use and a retail space on the site. So the city parcel, the 3.25 acres, would not be big enough to provide all of that research and development, and as well as townhome development or even any other sort of housing use.
No, but what's the square footage of the cannery? Is it equivalent?
Equivalent to what?
The
It's
cannery's
much larger.
than the park?
Yeah.
Is to try and keep as much of the cannery as possible. Maybe the open space gets put into the cannery.
Okay.
Okay, but going back to what we're looking at, I would like to see the original plans of the cannery, just so we have some context of what we're looking at. I also agree that the Ash property should be separated out and given its own historic register.
When you say the original plans of the cannery, I don't know that we have more information than what's provided in the historical resources evaluation. Can you clarify if there's something, what specifically were you looking
Is there,
for?
I mean, I didn't see any floor plan drawing.
Oh,
of
the floor plan of
plans
just
and the
what the
elevations.
existing
Yeah, the
looks like
original
as
architectural
today?
drawings, yeah.
Today, or as it exists today, or?
No, the original.
We don't have any information other than what is provided in that historical resources evaluation. I mean, what exists today is consistent in our understanding with what was all the changes that were done within the period of significance. Is that?
I think part of the issue is, our archives burned at some point, so that a lot of the original drawings we might have had went up in flames. What's now the fire building? Is that true? Or I guess the adjacent to the fire building, what was City Hall at the time on Bryant Street. But I suspect there were never serious architectural drawings for this building anyway, just because of its use.
Okay, so my feeling is looking at listing aspects of this, on the city's registry, I would really like to look at the Ash building and the Cannery building separately, because I think that however this project shakes out, they're going to be very different in terms of their level of integrity, and I think it would be helpful to be able to examine those buildings on their own. And rather as an entire site. Like other board members have commented, I would also hope that, there are ways to incorporate greater sensitivity to preservation of the character defining features, into the plan. However, I also recognize that that is, at least in its current form, not sufficient to maintain eligibility for the California Register. So, but I do think that preserving, some aspects, preserving what we can is better than preserving none. And I also do agree with the hope that some thorough documentation can be completed of aspects of the building that are going to be demolished, so that there's at least a reference for people to look back at, for purposes of study later on, if that's ever necessary. I do think documentation is important when a resource is going to be lost wholly or in part. And it is a little hard for me to comment on the, interpretive signage or public art without kind of more of a concrete proposal. I'm definitely supportive of that idea. As someone who works in public art, I would sort of recommend that at this point, even in these early planning phases for something like a public art installation, to start thinking now about the ultimate maintainability of any artwork that is installed in a public location, because those artworks see a lot of use, they see a lot of interaction, they're potentially exposed to the elements, and all of that takes a toll over time on the artwork. And there are things you can do now in the planning process to make that future easier. So I'd ask that if they're thinking about a public art installation, to think about how that art installation is maintained and cared for going forward. And then I would also really like to encourage, significant engagement with Palo Alto's Asian community in this process, because I think that's really vital to communicating the story of this location. So I would really encourage that dialogue as well. And that's all.
Okay, Melissa's comments remind me that in the old Fry's, there were significant displays about the history of the building, and I'm just wondering if we have seen, are those still in existence? Do we have any idea that they might be?
Say that again? Which?
The displays, the historic the displays about the history of the building that were in the old Fry's store?
I wasn't aware.
No, huh? Well, they were good.
No.
So it might be worth looking to see if they're still there. I don't know. But I do think it's worth exploring the very earliest structure as a standalone historic resource that I think potentially qualifies for the National Register. I understand that, my first impression looking at it is the sheer mass of the building is a very strong visual aspect of it, but it is a conglomerate. It was added. And I think a lot of it was separate buildings that were joined together at different periods in time. So it was very amorphous, but I think that because the original building is still very identifiable and potentially restorable, I think we should look at that as a separate resource. The work that's happening along Park, my biggest objection to it is the fact that it's really shutting off the cannery site from the public view. And in addition to losing the building itself, or the 40% of the building itself, I think we're losing the visual connection to our neighborhood. So I think opening up some kind of visual avenue into the site, especially if it's becoming city parkland, I think that would be really an important aspect. And I do think when we do consider housing in parkland, it would be important to center the open space around the original part of the building. The site, I think, is ripe for to be a California historic landmark, which we have used with similar sites where buildings have been totally demolished. I think, as people have mentioned, a significant part of our city is Asian, and I think that it would be respectful to have a historic landmark site on this, or historic landmark marker on this site. And I think the state of California would be open to that. I think it would be a sign of goodwill if the applicant would apply for that. I do support putting looking at putting, in my mind, it's just the central portion of the building on our local register. I know it's sad to lose the massing of the building, but I think that something that reads in the early historic period would have some great value to our community. So my assessment would be that once one wing is gone, that the middle part is stronger on its own than and combined with the additional office space that's closer to El Camino. As someone mentioned, sorry, I don't remember who, I think it is an important educational tool. And I think we should perhaps explore combining this history. Maybe there's a high school intern that would take the information that's already existing here and turn it into a lesson plan for our third grade history classes that teachers in our schools could use. And lastly, I think that if the applicant would be willing, their California Preservation Society has open days in September, and I think it would be a really good opportunity to educate our community about this building while it still is intact. So do we have any suggestions or any other roundup we want to do on this topic?
Question. Are the descendants of the Chu family still around? Would they have any information?
Yes, we heard hi, this is Amy. We heard from a member of the Chu family, I think the granddaughter, sorry. July 25th, 2019. I'm happy to forward minutes from that meeting. Board members Wimmer and Bauer were in attendance at that meeting. Mike was on the board, but he wasn't in attendance at that meeting. So I'm happy to forward that to you so you can see she spoke. One thing I might say is that when we haven't, and I think Mike is attending the meeting now, we can verify with Veronica. Did he join? Okay. So don't forget to ask Mike if he has any comments, right? Or questions. Then finally, this is an action item. Even though it's kind of a study session, it's also an action item because we plan to have you continue this so we can come back to address some of the, the questions and the requests and the project itself. So,
So do we need to put a motion together going forward?
Yeah, so just, I guess a couple things. So I guess I would be looking for kind of a.
Claire, do you think I should ask Mike for his comments first?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
Sorry, I need him to show up. Mike, do you have comments?
You see him in the group? Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, thanks for the opportunity to make some comments right here. I agree with most of my fellow board members that more needs to be done as far as looking at the preservation, historic reuse, and especially the adaptive reuse of these unique buildings. I fully agree with David Bauer's comparison with the work that was done at the Presidio when they made the effort to focus on adaptive reuse of the buildings and not the destruction of the historic character. That's where we need to focus on this particular project. The alternatives have not been given due diligence as what can be done here. I think this whole project was been channeled into a certain direction and manipulated to try to get the historic buy-in. that what is being proposed is proper. I think this is not the proper approach, and I think we should look at the unique opportunities for adaptive reuse. I'm particularly interested in the concept of an arts center that could be adaptively reused in the cannery building. I think that's a great opportunity. And once these buildings are gone, they're gone forever. And that's a big part of our heritage here in the city of Palo Alto. I'd be very disappointed to see this project proceed as proposed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. David?
I've been working, as I've listened to my current board members' comments, to try to find a place where I think this project is summarized well, and that I finally found it. It is page 76 of our packet. It is the conclusions that Page and Turnbull characteristics required for of character defining features, and I'll quickly read those off. Their location, setting, design, materials, workmanship, feeling, association. Their conclusion on page 76 is that the subject property retains its integrity, and of course that means it would be eligible for listing. 6 of the 7 criteria are met by the current building. I remember projects where 1 or 2 of the criteria have been met. So we're not talking about a marginal building here. We're talking about a really significant space that retains its character and its meaning to the community. Also, I noticed there are TDR rights as part of this project. Those are just purchased by the developer?
No, not TDRs, TDM, Transit Demand Management. There's no TDRs.
Okay, my
associated.
mistake. Yeah, I was wondering, transfer development rights usually are related to something. Okay, sorry. Thank you for that clarification. All right.
So Claire, sorry to interrupt you earlier. Did I totally lose your train of thought?
No, not completely. I apologize. So I guess I have a few kind of follow-up questions. So again, this is a public hearing and we want to get kind of directions, at least in like a straw poll kind of format from the board on what's worth us exploring as we move forward. I do want to make a couple clarifications. So the city is starting that public arts process. So next week, we'll be doing a meeting with the Public Arts Commission to do an initial meeting to get feedback on kind of placement of the art. The applicant has just brought on a art consultant to help manage the public art process. I think what we were really interested in understanding today is interest, if there is something specific you'd like us to explore, key, I think you guys have spoken a lot to what you think are like the key aspects of the history that we would want to prioritize. And it seems like that's mostly focused on Thomas Funchu and his kind of role in the canning industry and how it relates to the community that he brought together. And so I think that would be certainly something that we would want to explore as part of the public art piece. There is a significant amount of money that would be available for the public art. So hearing Board Member Wimmer's comments about kind of the public space, there has been exploration about whether it's worth trying to kind of split it and do some public art related to the cannery building and also do a public art kind of in lieu fee for a portion of it, which could then be used we would then control that and be able to do something potentially at the public park once it's dedicated and available to us. So that can certainly be an exploration as well. I think I'm still a little bit unclear about direction. I hear the comments regarding alternatives, and we can certainly look into that. But I think in terms of direction, I guess I want clarity on, whether the building as it's proposed to remain, whether there are more specific certain features that you think are really more valuable, I guess, to retain, or whether you want it to align, as much as possible with the Secretary of Interior standards. Kind of the trade-off to that is some of the changes that are being made. I want to make clear is we're changing kind of a warehouse use to office and retail, and so. Just from that perspective, there are certain kind of urban design features that would be desirable for, especially for like a retail type use. And so some of the changes, maybe are more appropriate from an urban design perspective, but they do take away from or are less in line with the Secretary of Interior standards. And so if there's a balance that should be made with respect to that, or if there's just, we want to retain the building kind of as is, which is also a, perfectly valid comment. And so wanted to kind of better understand that from board members.
Not sure how to go about a consensus opinion here. So let's talk about, maybe we could just each say, what we would want in terms of preservation. I guess preservation, right? Would that address that issue? So the most important historic features and how you see they would be presented. And let's combine this with whether we've kind of got consensus on local registry, right? So we think.
There were a couple board members that still felt there was value in identifying the remaining building on the local register.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that was shared by all, though. I think some people felt like it was more important to explore the Ash building. So I'm not sure I do have clarity on that.
Okay, so let's go with that too. So Margaret, can you lead us off with kind of a little 3-sentence summary of your feelings on?
Yes, obviously the Ash building, we've already discussed that. That makes total sense. But in terms of the cannery, I would take that main original building and follow the Page and Turnbull memo that talks about the character defining features and retain all of that so that it maintains its historic status. The additions to the building, especially, to the El Camino side where there's the single story additions, that does nothing in my mind, historically to me, if we can maintain the main building with the feature roofs. I think if we can preserve that, I think we would have done a great job.
And weigh in on local registry and maybe a California historic landmark.
Well, I believe if we can have the building retain its historic value, then yes, it should definitely be on a local inventory if it's not already, and then we can go for a national. I don't know how much work that is, who's going to pursue that. I think we need to start locally and have it on the Palo Alto local register. It would also be nice if somehow we can have the protection of this building as a condition of them doing the big housing development. It seems like we'll let you do that if you preserve this. I would love to see that written into the, if that's at all possible. It seems like a fair trade-off.
Yeah, so I do want to make it clear that from our historic consultant and even I believe the applicant's historic consultant, the removal of the portion of the building, we can explore this further based on board member Bauer's comments, but we have identified in the EIR that the removal of the portion of the building for the townhome up to the monitor roofs would be a significant and unavoidable impact on a historic resource and enough to lose its integrity for the California Register or potentially the National Register. So they could preserve all remaining aspects exactly as is, but even if they do that, we do not believe that it would be eligible for the California Register still. The city has more kind of authority and could still place it on a local register if they wanted to, though.
I mean, I think having it on the local register is an achievement. It's our community. This is our heritage. This is our history. If we can just recognize that as our own city, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily important to have it on a national register. If we can get it on that's how I feel. Unless there's some benefits to being on the national register, I think just having it on the local register is an achievement, personally.
Thank you, Margaret. So David, can you summarize your thoughts along the lines of?
My strongest feeling is that this building should be retained in its current form and repurposed, renovated according to the SOS standards and repurposed in any way usable. I don't see the need, as I'm looking at the site plan, to have the 74 housing units.
David, can I interrupt a sec? I'd like us to focus on whether the interpretive signage, the art,
okay,
the
sorry.
local registry, and maybe the California Historic Landmark.
So I don't really have any comments about art or signage because we don't have, as Margaret said, we don't have anything proposed. So I don't know what comments would be relevant. I mean, I don't feel I have any relevant comments for that.
I think what staff is looking for, and Claire, maybe you can help me, is whether we want that to be something, whether we want any signage. I mean, I guess bad signage, we don't want that, but.
More just any early feedback. We recognize nothing is before you, so that if there's early feedback on what you might want to see, because we are going to be starting that process and we expect to return to you with something.
So you're referring to something like a plaque or that describes the historic significance? Is that signage?
Yeah, so there's two requirements that the applicant will be required to do. One is a mitigation measure of the project, which is a requirement to provide interpretive display, which is likely going to include at minimum a plaque of some sort, probably in like that retail, open retail space. In addition, there's approximately $840,000 that would be required as part of the public art in lieu fee based on the valuation of the project. That might, be in part, like that could be aligned with the interpretive display, but certainly an interpretive display is not necessarily going to cost that much. And so there's going to be additional money. The council has expressed kind of an expectation that at least a portion of that money would be used to further convey the history of the site in some way. And so we're going to be exploring kind of art installations in or near the cannery building that would help with that. Potentially, some of that money would go to in lieu and presumably would be used somewhere in that area, potentially in this future public park.
Okay, so with no disrespect, I don't believe that, as you just described, signage to be appropriate here, because I don't believe that that's a mitigation feature. I fully appreciate why that's been put in here, but there's no mitigation for demolition, and I don't see that this is a value. And I would encourage that the money that's being set aside to be used for art and have the art commission actually find public art. I think there is an idea, and even I had this idea before I became a board member and before I started attending seminars, that the idea is that by putting up I just, that's just not mitigation, frankly. I mean, there isn't any mitigation. So I would redirect that money to public art in the parks, something, and I love public art in these new projects. I like seeing those things. It makes the space better. But I don't want people to think, because we have a photo view of what the building used to look like and a little history, that's mitigation. I don't oppose that, but that's not mitigation. That's just my opinion. I'm not arguing with you about it. I'm just saying, I don't think that's what we should be considering here. We should be considering not having to mitigate demolition. So in terms of, yeah, I guess in terms of, I have no more to say. Oh, of course, we should have it on local inventory. There's lots we need to do with local inventory. Absolutely, a minimum, I think.
Well, I agree it should go on the local inventory. And, but I also think there ought to be a little cross-pollination and a conversation between the Arts Commission and somebody from a historic perspective in this, at least is it informal or a public event, like a study session type thing, before all that goes forward. Does that make sense? At least a little bit of cross awareness. Art and history aren't necessarily incompatible.
I'll jump in on that just for a second, and to say that because we have the opportunity to, and I don't know how well these public art meetings, commission meetings are attended by the public, but certainly like any other commissioner council, we can have representation from the HRB. If anyone is interested in attending that meeting and would like to volunteer, we can give you the details.
And you'll make sure we're aware. You'll make sure we're aware when they do discuss the building.
Yes, we can send, we can have a link to the packet and.
Yeah, the packet goes out today. It's gonna, the initial meeting with the Public Arts Commission to get initial feedback from them will be next Thursday at 7 p.m. So if there is a representative that would want to be present for that.
I'm sorry, did you say next Thursday at 7 p.m.?
Yes.
Okay, thank
Sorry to derail. Maybe we'll, after you finish this round on the inventory ideas, we can come back to that.
Am I on? Okay. I would like to see the portion of the cannery put on the local registry. I would like to see the ash building put on the California National Registry. As far as the art and signage, I think if we could do a combination and interpretive of all three, it would be very helpful to focus the money on the history. Thank you.
Yes, I'm also interested in exploring a local listing for both the cannery building and the ash building. And I would encourage considering the buildings separately so that they can potentially land at different category levels. And I am definitely supportive of pursuing interpretive signage for the site, and as well as a California landmark designation or point of historical interest designation as appropriate.
Thank you. So I do support the California Historic Landmark designation. I think that would be a really, I can't remember what they're called, but like the APP garage and, you know, our other Professorville. I know this is kind of a hard definition, but I would really like to see the original cannery building as art. And I would like to see the art money go into that building to give it a strong historical presence for what its original image and function was. And I believe somebody's capable of doing that. I think that we have been ignoring Fry's, but I think that might come back to us in 10 years because in my mind, Fry's Electronics was a real turning point in the community. It was a community center. It was where we all had, like our home electronics were growing like mad at that point. And we were all there like every other day. It was such a lifeline to a new way of life that I guess it hasn't been quite 50 years, but it must be close. And I feel like we shouldn't totally ignore that aspect of the site. And I think I think we should explore the local inventory, but in my mind, I think the additions are a distraction. And I think that if we had a really strong central building as a local historic landmark or a local historic resource, it would really serve us well. And I would also like to see it set off from its attached neighbor, I think. Not to say that it wasn't important as an entire site at one point, but I think that at this point we're losing the semblance of the entirety of it. And I think we would do better to sort of regroup and circle our wagons around the original structure, which I think was very important in terms of the original time of, its significance, not perhaps through the 1940s, but for, it's early times. And Claire, is there anything else we can qualify for you?
Don't forget Mike. If Mike has any final comments.
Mike, I so apologize. I just not seeing you here. I'm gonna have to have your picture up in front of me now. But Mike, do you have comments on these topics?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I'd like to go back to a lot of the comments that have been expressed here, that this is a very unique building in the city of Palo Alto. And I think we ought to be very careful that what is going to happen with this building is what the community needs, not what the developer needs, what the community needs. We need more art in our life. We need more public spaces to reflect and enjoy life. We don't need a lot of additional office spaces and that type of thing. We need more things for cultural enlightenment. So I think any effort we can do to encourage that direction for adaptive reuse of this building is what we should be doing. It's a unique opportunity. It's a unique building. You don't see this type of building every day. And we have the opportunity here to redirect the way this project is going. It's something that's going to benefit the bulk of the people in the city of Palo Alto. So those are the main thrust of my thoughts right here. So I think the alternatives have not been given due diligence as far as what we could utilize these structures for. So, and I'm all in favor of putting any register that we can put these properties on. I would be in favor of that also. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So Claire, do you need further qualifications from us?
No, I think that was very helpful. Thank you. Perhaps
that sounds good. Do we need a motion to continue to a date uncertain?
Actually, I don't think that's required unless unless February 9th was something you wanted to do to continue some conversation, but we wouldn't be able to pull together enough, I don't believe, by that point.
Yeah, the intent is certainly to come back with a more detailed plan, any interpretive signage, ideas of public art, potentially more information related to the listing of this building. So I think we need some time to explore that. We wanted to get the feedback and we intend to come back, but we don't have a date in mind yet. So
Amy, maybe I could request that we have access to the new drawings online, the new set of drawings online, the agenda for the Public Arts Commission, any material that they get regarding this project. So if we could just have kind of a lifeline online to sort of follow along as the project progresses.
We can certainly send an email to the entire board with, links as appropriate to the art and the prior minutes as well. I was thinking that would be helpful from when the HRB former incarnation had a look at that HRE and other things like a link to the plans. So.
Sounds good. Thank you. And thank you, Claire, for all your work. You really did. I mean, it was a lot for us to digest, but we do appreciate it. So let's move on to approval of minutes from whenever that was, November. Do we have any corrections to the minutes?
Yes, I have a correction. In the last paragraph regarding the Burge Clark book, it should say, one thing they have just completed is a book written on Burge Clark. It should be past tense, not to write a book.
Oh. Thank you. Anything else? And do I have a motion to approve if there's not further corrections?
I move to approve.
I second.
And do I take a roll call vote?
Yes. Board Member Bauer,
Approve.
Board Member Eggleston Chesley,
Approve.
Board Member Heinrich,
Approve.
Board Member McKinnon, Board Member McKinnon, I think you're on mute.
Approve.
Vice Chair Pease,
Approve.
Chair Willis,
Approve.
Board Member Wimmer,
I was absent, so I abstain.
motion carries 6-0.
Thank you. So do we have any general questions, comments, or announcements or anything, future things we want on the agenda, blah, 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 blah?
I went to the past meeting last night, and they're proceeding with their sales of the Burge Clark book, and they're planning their future walking tours for the spring.
Thank you. Any other comments? Thank you. Amy?
Yes, just Claire reminded me that you may or may not be aware that the city received, a commitment of, I think, $3 million or something from the feds, from a national source. I can't think on the National Park Service, that's it, for the Roth Building. So, which is the former Palo Alto Medical Foundation. So, and to be a museum. So we're working with them on some of the documentation for related to environmental review to make sure the city does receive that money, or the project receives the money. Yeah. So that's good news.
Hallelujah. So also, Amy, do we have any update on our consultants?
I'm hoping that the February 12th meeting is going to be a good meeting for us in that regard.
Thank you. And then do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
And I never remember, do we voice vote this one? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
And opposed? Thank you very much. And thank you all for waiting for all this information.